Well, now, there you are. Oh, welcome, 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 good friends and fellow tree lovers, welcome. Oh, how good to see you again after so long a time. Happy heart. Forgive me for not greeting you downstairs. I was up in the bell tower, you see, singing to the sunset when I saw you coming along the path. Well, I hurried down, but old Mount Shasta hobbles me a bit nowadays. Oh, old Mount Shasta is the name that I've given to this hoof here, commemorating a frost nipping it received up on that glorious mountain in a winter storm many years ago. Oh, and did you notice? Oh, there's an incredibly wonderful storm creeping in right now from the west. It should be here soon overhead. Well, there I go. I'm wandering already, aren't I? Please, just grab yourself a stump anywhere at all and make yourselves as comfy as you can. Yeah, and how good to see you. Yeah, and it is glorious, too, dear tree lovers, that you have been kind enough to come up and keep vigil with me here tonight. My friend Merrill from the Sierra Club in San Francisco, well, he will have received the news by now, and he's promised to telephone directly, so we shall soon have word of the actions of our President Wilson and the fate of Hetchy Valley. Yeah, his damn raker bill. He has upset everyone. Well, think on it. 3 or 4 ambitious politicians and shifty traders calling themselves the city of San Francisco, bargaining like Yankee horse traders for half of the Yosemite National Park, and then working in darkness like moles in a low-lying meadow. Well, you did know that when the Senate passed the raker bill 2 weeks ago, they did so at midnight session. They seem to have a perfect contempt for nature. And instead of lifting their eyes to the God of the mountains, lift them instead to the almighty dollar. And to gain that almighty dollar, they'll turn that incredibly beautiful valley into a water tank. They dam up the Hetchy. We might as well dam up the people's cathedrals and churches, use them for water tanks, for no holier temple was ever consecrated by the heart of man. Politicians tinkering with the Yosemite waterworks, improving Yosemite. Oh, I tell you, we shall yet hear of an appropriation to whitewash the face of El Capitan, or to correct the curves of Half Dome. Well, you must forgive my raving. Well, I've been cooped up here all day, you see, waiting for Merrill and the word. And, well, my anger has been cooped up with me, you see. Well, now 'tis fully released, and I should think that we could make ourselves perfectly comfy. Oh, and now, if you should find any of these old journals in your path, you just kick them off into the corner. Damn things. I've been poking through these musty, dusty Yosemite and Alaska notes of mine until I'm blinky blind. I don't know what's got into me writing so many books at once. It is not natural. You know, truth is, I have a low opinion of books. Books are but piles of stone set up to show coming travelers where other minds have been. But no amount of word making could make a single soul to truly know the mountains. One day's exposure to the mountains, better than mountains of books, eh? Well, they'll not get any mountains of books from me, for I make hard, slow work of it, hard and slow as glaciers. Well, here, look, and here, in 3 or 4 days, mind, enough for, 5 minutes worth of reading. Well, the difficulty is, you see, the difficulty is that as soon as I sit down and begin to describe something, or a flower, or a tree, or an Indian, or a chipmunk, or a storm, up jumps the whole heavens and the earth. Did you ever notice? Whenever you try to pick out anything by itself, you find it hitched to everything else in the universe. Well, it makes it damn hard work. Hard work. Now, for the resiliency of youth, eh? I think as a young boy in the schools of Scotland, I could have written an entire book after dinner and before I went to bed. For although we had no books to write in those days, I did have to get 3 lessons every day in Latin, and then 3 in French, and as many in English, as well as spelling, arithmetic, geography, history. But it was the word lessons in particular, and all those languages, all that grammar, where you remember, the wouldest, shouldest, couldest have loved kind. They were kept up amid much warlike thrashing until I had committed the whole of the French, English, and Latin grammars to memory. And I was called upon to recite the rules over and over again, as if all that regular and irregular, incomprehensible verb stuff was poetry. In addition to all this, of course, my father made me learn so many Bible verses every day that by the time I was 11 years of age, I had 3/4 of the Old Testament and all of the New by heart, and sore flesh. I don't think there's anything that would now enable me to concentrate my attention more fully than when I was a mere stripling boy. And it was all done by whipping, thrashing in general. Neither my father nor old-fashioned Scot teachers spent any time in seeking short roads to knowledge, or using any of the newfangled psychological methods so much in vogue nowadays. Oh no, we were simply driven against our books like soldiers against the enemy, and sternly ordered, up and at 'em, commit your lessons to memory. And if we failed in any part, however slight, we were whipped. For the grand, simple, all-sufficing Scot discovery had been made that there was a close connection between the skin and memory, and that irritating the skin excited the memory to any required degree. The whole educational system was founded on leather. Thrashings were everywhere in those days. Thrashings in the schools of Scotland came to an abrupt end in my 11th year. One night, when my brother David and I were solemnly studying our grammar as usual, Father burst in with the most incredibly wonderful news that wild boys ever heard. "Burns," he said, "you needn't learn your lessons enough, for you're gone to America the morn." No more grammar, you see, but boundless woods and wilderness, and to our young minds, filled with mysterious good things. Trees full of sugar, and growing, we were sure, in ground full of gold, and hawks, eagles, and pigeons, pigeons filling the sky, and in millions of birds' nests, and no gameskeepers to stop us in all that wonderful, schoolless, bookless American wilderness. And I was put to the plow at the age of 12, when my head reached but little above the handles, and I was called upon every morning at 4 o'clock and seldom got to bed before 9, making a seething, broiling day, 17 hours long, loaded with heavy work, stump digging and tree clearing, house building, harvesting. But but we had settled in a fine wild region in Wisconsin, beside a small glacial lake surrounded by white pond lilies. And on the north side of the lake, just below our house, was a fine carex meadow filled with begonias and asters and goldenrods, etc. And around the margins of the meadow, many nooks rich in flowering ferns and heathworts. Well, you see, we were still at school, but every wild lesson a love lesson, and not whipped, but charmed into us. You know, I did not see then that all of that hard work of clearing the trees from that Wisconsin farm was in fact what was being done to the nation. You see, in the beginning, in the settlement and civilization of the country, bread more than timber or beauty was wanted, and the early settlers regarded God's trees as only a larger kind of pernicious weeds. Accordingly, the smoke of their burning has been rising to heaven for more than 200 years. From Maine to Georgia, and all the way across the Rocky Mountains, the land has been scorched and burned into melancholy ruin. And now, having reached the very last of the aboriginal forest, here on the shores of the Pacific, the axe and the saw are still insanely busy. Chips are flying thick as snowflakes from the Sierra to Alaska. Every year, thousands of pine-treed acred forests are vanishing in clouds of smoke. And with them vanish the soil and the underbrush, the springs, the climate, the scenery, and the poetry, and religion, all sold to the highest bidder. We might as well sell the rain clouds, or the fountain snow, or the rivers. Sell the rivers, cut them up, carry them away. If it could be done, or if there were fun or a dollar in it, Lord man would certainly do it. The wealthy wicked, the felons, and the pinchos, and their hirelings, they will not thrive forever. Although they now strut about with that proud sort of confidence that comes from a deep, sound, substantial ignorance. Well, none of their descriptions of the hetch-hetchy, damned or undamned, is true. Well, Phelan here, Phelan, our former mayor of San Francisco, is quoted in the Examiner just the other day. He says there are 1,000 places in the Sierra, he says, as beautiful as the hetch-hetchy. Yeah. And he says it's an inaccessible place anyways, 9 months of the year because of snow, and an unlivable place the other 3 months because of mosquitoes. And then Pinchot, here, Chief of Forestry, telling Congress that the conversion of the hetch-hetchy into a reservoir, a water tank, well, it will simply mean, you know, that we shall have a lake where there was once a meadow. Well, it's all nonsense. Perfect compost. It is accessible all the year. It is not more mosquitoful than Yosemite, and more. Hetch-hetchy is not a meadow. It's another Yosemite Valley. Only a mountain away, only a few miles away from Yosemite, and formed by the same forces, and lying at the same height above sea level, with the same plant people, the same fellow creatures, and the same waterfalls. And furthermore, it is the hall of entrance into the Grand Tuolumne Canyon, which opens a wonderful way up into the Tuolumne Meadows, and which would be blocked if the hetch-hetchy was submerged. All those plant people drowned. We seem to think that since Herod beheaded John the Baptist, that there's no longer any voice crying in the wilderness. Every one of the flowers is such a voice. I do wish it were the voice of Roosevelt still in office. Teddy. Now there was an all-round, strong, bold, good man. He had, as they say, seen the elephant, and nobody could fool or bulldoze him. He did have an unfortunate tendency to shoot the elephants he saw, however. Still, I never before had a more interesting or hearty or manlier companion. I fairly fell in love with him. And during our 3-day camping trip up in the Yosemite, I stuffed him pretty well full of stories of the timber thieves and other spoilers of the forest. And good Roosevelt. Before the end of his term, he had set aside more than 200 million acres of land for protection and created 5 national parks. Bully Roosevelt. He did annoy me around the campfire, though, as he spoke all too frequently of his heroic conquest of wild game. Indeed, I was finally driven to address him on the subject with my usual tact. He had just finished describing the slaughter or the maiming of some poor beast, and I turned to him rather abruptly and I said, "Mr. Roosevelt, when are you going to get beyond the boyishness of killing things? Are you not getting far enough along to leave that off?" He pondered my audacity for a moment and then replied rather weakly, I thought, "Muir, I guess you're right." Guess. Good guess, I'd say. Well, I still read in the papers of him off torturing some poor crocodile in Africa somewhere. When will godlike human beings become truly humane and learn to put their fellow animal mortals in their hearts instead of on their backs or in their dinners? If a war of races were to break out between Lord Man and the wild beasts, I would be tempted to sympathize with the bears. But then, even to the least loved mosquito, I have given many a meal and told to go in peace. And to the dreaded crocodile, chased so energetically by our Mr. Roosevelt, I frequently sent wishes for them to be blessed now and then with the delicious tidbit of terror-stricken man. Not Mr. Roosevelt, of course. Preferably a felon or a pinchot. Not Mr. Roosevelt. Not a lover of the trees. You know, it has been said that trees are imperfect men and seem to bemoan their imprisonment, rooted in the ground, you know. Well, they never seem so to me. I never saw a discontented tree. Have you? No, they grip the ground as though they liked it. And though fast-rooted, they sometimes travel about as far as we do. Well, I remember once I was exploring a tributary valley of the Hetch Hetchy when I chanced upon the most bracing windstorm imaginable. Well, I lost no time in pushing off deep into the woods to enjoy it. The air was mottled with pine tassels and bright green plumes that went flashing past in the sunlight like birds pursued. And I heard trees crashing for hours, one every 2 or 3 minutes, some uprooted and some broken straight across. Well, I drifted on through this music and motion through the dancing trees until about midday I found myself on the summit of the highest ridge in the neighborhood. And then it occurred to me that it would be a grand idea to climb one of the swaying trees to obtain a wider outlook. Well, I made a cautious choice of the tallest of a group of Douglas firs that were growing close together like a tuft of grass, so no one of which was likely to fall over unless all the rest fell with it. They were about 100 feet tall, and their brushy tops were rocking and swirling in wild ecstasy. Being accustomed to climbing trees and making botanical studies, I experienced no difficulty in reaching the top of this one. But oh, never before did I experience such a noble exhilaration of motion. The slender top fairly flapped and swished in the passionate torrent, bending backwards and forwards, going round and around, tracing indescribable combinations of vertical and horizontal curves, while I clung with muscles firm braced like a bobolink on a reed. Oh, happy me. Well, you see, we all travel the Milky Way together, both trees and men. But it never occurred to me until that December storm day while swinging in the wind that trees are travelers in the ordinary sense. They make many journeys. Oh, not extensive ones, it's true, but then our own little journeys, away and back again, are little more than tree waving. And some of them not so much. I do miss the majesty of mountain storms. You know, people need the woods, and they're beginning to come to them, but they're not yet ready for storms. A lack of faith in the scriptures of nature. And then when they do come to the wilderness, good walkers can go anywhere in those hospitable mountains without artificial means. But most visitors nowadays seem to need to be rolled on wheels with blankets and kitchen arrangements and clinging to their stagecoaches and their trains. And now their automobiles, like wrecked sailors on rafts. Just last October, up at the Parks Conference in the Yosemite, the great question was, shall the automobile be allowed to enter the Yosemite? And a prodigious lot of gaseous eloquence was spent upon the subject by auto club delegates from near and far. All signs point to automobile victory. And doubtless these mechanical, blunt-nosed beetles will soon be puffing their way into all of the parks and mingling their gas breath with the breath of the pines and the waterfalls. And the damn bandits charge 12 cents a gallon for gasoline. This growing ease of transportation is a bit alarming. Well, tourists, you know. Oh, tourists. Well, already all sorts of human stuff is being poured into the valley, and the blank, fleshy apathy with which most of it greets the rock and water spirits of that place, well, is most amazing. They are addicted to the scenery habit, you know, all silliness and Kodak cameras and frightening the game with their outlandish costumes and wild umbrellas and hiking through the hiking. Hiking is a vile word, don't you think? One should saunter through the Sierra. But no, they go hiking through the wood. Down the easy trails to Muir Lake. You know they'll go where there's a Muir. Or they go horseback riding and climb, sprawling to their saddles like overgrown frogs hopping up a stream bank, and plod up and down the valley with about as much emotion as the horse they ride upon. I suppose that the tide of such visitors will float slowly to the bottom of the valley and collect like a harmless scum in the hotel lobbies. They'll leave the rocks and the waterfalls as eloquent as ever. Well, you know, whenever an excursion into the higher reaches is proposed, these people load themselves with all sorts of unnecessary fears and refuse to go, as if there were nothing in the wilderness except for snakes and bears and Indians going restlessly about seeking whom they might devour. Truth is, the few creatures remaining there have lost confidence in brother man, and it's not now easy to make their acquaintance. And no American wilderness I know is so dangerous as a city street with all its modern improvements. One should go to the woods for safety, if nothing else. But these people are like children, afraid of their mother. Or perhaps afraid of meeting the likes of me upon the trail. People have always commented that, I've always made a bit of a tramp of myself out there, you know. Worn, soiled clothing and hair, lots of hair, like a hillside overgrown with shaggy chaparral. Now, I remember one brave tourist, after examining me a bit, informing me quite emphatically, if I had a beard like yours, I would set fire to it. It's true. It's true, I did. I made a tramp of myself. And I went hungry and cold and left bloody trails on sharp ice peaks to see the wonders of this earth. But, you know, out there, I was free to come and go. No bell that rang meant me, no ding-dong civilization for me. No. I would simply stuff some bread and tea in an old sack and jump over the back fence, having all I needed for weeks. There were things out there to sustain me, things to fatten my soul, and all as free as the air. And as for the rest, well, a crust of bread and tea answer very well, if one has a mind to think so. Now, I know that some people would miss their meat as a drunkard misses his drink. But this depraved appetite for flesh stands greatly in the way of 3 days up on the mountains. For meat of any kind is hard to carry and makes a repulsive mess when stuffed into a pack. So also, the butter and the milk habit has seized most people. Have you noticed? Bread without butter. Coffee without milk. Awful calamity. As if everything, before being stuffed in our mouth, must first be held under a cow. Well, I know from long experience that all of these things are unnecessary. Eat bread in the mountains, and with love and adoration in your soul, you can get a nourishment that food experts know nothing of. Once in the mountains with my bread and tea, I was free to follow my instincts, to be myself, for good or ill, and see what would be the upshot. And I decided then that as long as I lived, I would hear the birds and the wings and the waterfalls sing. I'd interpret the rocks and learn the language of flood, storm, avalanche. I'd make the acquaintance of the wild gardens and the glaciers and get as close to the heart of the world as I could. And so I did. I drifted about from rock to rock, from grove to grove, from stream to stream. And whenever I met a new plant, I would sit down beside it for a minute or a day to make its acquaintance and hear what it had to tell. And I asked the boulders where they had been and whither they were going. And when night found me, well, there I camped. I took no more heed to save time or to make haste than did the trees or the stars. This is true freedom, a good practical sort of immortality, to hover among those mountains as if on spirit wings. You know, I've often thought that if I could be granted spirit wings, in fact, my first flight, my first journey, it would be among the folds and mazes of Yosemite Falls in the springtime. Oh, those falls. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if, in the midst of its headlong descent, with all that whirling fairy spray and those rushing comet tails, the falls were suddenly frozen, solid, and then carried bodily out into the middle of the valley, where we might go around it and see it on all sides. Oh, in the sunshine, what a show it would make. A colossal white pillar, half a mile tall, adorned with airy, flowing drapery, and as if chiseled out of white marble. One winter night, while camping up on Sunnyside Bench up by the upper falls, I saw a sight of Yosemite Falls I'd never seen before. 500 feet below my camp, it was the deep, dark cavern of the gorge, filled with tempestuous foam and scud and spray and the roar of many storms. And the falls hung another 1,000 feet above me, white and ghost-like, indistinct in the night. But then, from around the great domes out in front, rose a fat, full moon and took her white beams right down into the wild uproar below me, and lo, I could see there a rainbow, or I should say a moonbow, for it was colored like the solar bow, but fainter, and in the midst of that roaring, surging power, strangely peaceful and still. Well, I was then situated on a narrow ledge that worked its way out in back of the falls, and as at times the wind blew the mighty column of down-rushing water away from the face of the cliff, I thought it would be a grand idea to slip out on the ledge, get behind the down-rushing water, and see the moonlight sifting through. Well, I got out safely enough, although the ledge was icy and only 6 inches wide in one spot. But I was standing there and gazing up and out through the half-transparent edge of the falls, enjoying the moonlight, when suddenly everything went dark. I heard heavy splashes strike the wall above me, and then down came the falls like a dash of comets, thin and harmless enough to look at a mile off, but desperately solid and stony when they struck my shoulders. Well, I grasped an angle of the ledge and held hard with my knees, but it was as if I were being pelted by a mixture of choking spray and gravel. Surely I would be swept off into the tempest and rocks 500 feet below. Well, I thought, at least a glorious death, a mountaineer's death. But we little know the vast capacity that our flesh has for knowledge. It was as if my body, clinging there, found my sluggish mind insufficient, and so it just pushed it aside. And I became possessed of a new sense, an instinct, a guardian angel, call it what you will, but suddenly my quivering nerves became inflexible. I could see every rift, every niche, every tablet in the cliff as though through a microscope, and as soon as the pelting had nearly ceased and the column swaying back admitted a bit of light, I made haste to jump in back of a block of ice that was frozen to the ledge and gathered my courage and made a dash for freedom. Oh, what a baptism had I that night. Some of the earthiness washed out of me, and Yosemite virtue washed in, and better, oh, better, not worse, for my wild bath and lunar bows and comet tails and moonshine. I do get carried away, don't I? I remember once I was standing in front of a grove of those giant wonders, the sequoia, with my tree lover friend Sergeant from Boston. Well, I couldn't hold it in, and I began to jump about and sing and glory in it all like a Negro Methodist in revival time, when I happened to turn around and catch sight of Sergeant standing there cool as a rock, with a half-amused smile on his face, but never saying a word. Why don't you let yourself out at a sight like that, man? I asked him. Well, I don't wear my heart upon my sleeve, he retorted. Who cares where you wear your little heart, man? There you stand, in the face of all heaven come down to earth, like a critic of the universe, as if to say, come, nature, bring on the best you have. I'm from Boston. To which he replied, he says, Muir, get a pulpit, man. Get a pulpit. Yeah, I often wish I could mount a pulpit and preach the green-brown woods to all the juiceless world, descending like a John the Baptist from the divine wilderness and eating raw honey and raw anything and crying out, repent, for the kingdom of Sequoia is at hand. Merle, at long last, Merle, and news of Hetchy. Yes, Merle. Yes, I see. No, Merle, no discouragement. Though this battle be lost, the fight must go on. I know. The enemies of wildness seem invincible. They seem everywhere, but the fight must go on. And dear tree lover, for every acre that you gain, 10,000 trees and flowers, and all the other forest people, and the usual unborn generations will rise up and call you blessed. Yes. Thank you, Merle. Brisk wind out there. A good storm brewing. For youth enough to snatch a pan of bread and run to the Hetchy to comfort those poor plant people. You know, as a young man, I thought myself a strong butterfly, full of sunshine, who would not settle long in any one place. And indeed, for many, many years, I went by crooked, unanticipated paths from flower to flower. But the flower I tarried with the longest was Louis Wanda. My lovely Louis Wanda. I married Louis in my 42nd year and for 10 years engaged in fruit farming here in Martinez, clearing the land, planting the vineyards, selling the fruit, mostly grapes. 10 years. Well, time partially reconciles us to anything, and I gradually became content, as wild animals become content in cages. Well, imagine me puttering around with those miserable grapes as if in length of life I expected to rival sequoia, condemning myself to penal servitude with those miserable little bald heads. And for money, man, I could have died for the shame of it. But Louis Wanda saw, and she understood. And once when I was away on a brief trip, she wrote me this. Dear John, in these 10 years, I've learned that neither time nor space can ever separate us, and that wherever you be, I am with you. A ranch that needs and takes the sacrifice of a noble life or work ought to be flung away beyond all reach or power for harm. And by the time I arrived home again, Louis Wanda had already arranged to sell part of the farm and to lease the balance. And so, let my clock warn and point as it pleased, I was a tramp once more, and now for the rest of my life. Well, I'm still a tramp, and still good at it. And the pine trees, yeah, well, they're in ecstasy now, and I feel it, and I must go out to them. For until these good botanical pegs here are straightened in a box and planted, well, it behooves me to keep them tramping and twinkling in the woods as long as possible. For the pine trees are reminding me that earth hath no sorrow, that earth cannot heal, and that between every two pine trees there is a door leading to a new life. I'll be back before morning, able to leap Yosemite walls at a bound. I even with old Mount Shasta here. And mornings will come, you know. Dawnings of some kind. And if not, well, all these years have been for me one unbroken day, one grand walk in one grand garden. I've lived a common eternity already. And this whole grand show is eternal, you know. It's always sunrise somewhere. The vapor is forever rising. A shower is forever falling as the round world turns. Therefore, we will have faith and be calm. And as for the Hetch-Hetchy, well, that miracle of place, now a political miracle of Lord Man, who would improve the beauty of that most beautiful of all mountain parks by drowning its thickets of azalea and wild rose 200 or 300 feet deep. And after this is done, we are promised a road blasted on the north slope of the wall where nature lovers may sit on rustic stools like frogs on a log to admire the grave of Hetch-Hetchy. What will Lord Man ultimately do with the mountains? Will he drown all the valleys, cut down all the trees for his ships and his houses? And if so, what will be the upshot? Will human destruction, like those of nature, fire, flood, and avalanche, create some higher good, some finer beauty? I cannot believe it. For if most of humanity must go through this town stage of development, still people must come to the mountains now and then for fresh life. Just as divers must hold their breath but come ever and anon to the surface to breathe. Once when I was a boy, I was led down into a deep well into which choke damp had settled, and I nearly lost my life. It was at our farm in Wisconsin. A well 90 feet deep had to be dug, all except the first 10 feet or so in finely grained sandstone. I had to sit cramped in a space about 3 feet in diameter and wearily chip with heavy hammers and chisels from early morning until dark, day after day, month after month. One day, when the dreary bore was about 80 feet deep, my father and brother David lowered me as usual in a wooden bucket by a windlass and waited to pick up the chips that were left down there from the night before. But deadly choke damp, carbonic acid gas, had settled in the bottom during the night. And instead of clearing away the chips as usual, I simply weaved back and forth under the influence of the poison. Father, alarmed that I made no noise, shouted down to me, but of course got no reply. And just as I was leaning back up against the wall, I happened to look up and caught sight there of a branch, oh blessed bur oak tree, that leaned across the shaft, and this suddenly awakened me, and I cried up weakly, "Take me out." But when my father began to hoist, he found that I was not in the bucket, and in wild alarm he shouted down to me, get in the bucket, hold on, hold on." Somehow, I do not remember how, I managed to get into the bucket and was dragged out, violently gasping for breath. But I do remember this. The horror was this. The deeper I was immersed in that invisible poison, the less capable I became of willing measures to escape from it. And in just this condition are those who toil and dawdle and dissipate in their crowded towns. So truly poisoned has Lord man become, so pathetically immersed in his little jobs of town building and job getting and in the study of spirits in heaven, etc., that he can see nothing of the heaven that he is in. And so he sometimes fails to rise to defend it. And I feel as my father must have felt, and I want to shout to him as my father to me, get in the bucket, hold on, hold on. For unless we are able to rouse ourselves, the forest and our national parks will forever be attacked by robbers of every degree, from presidents to senators, from city supervisors to dam builders, all justifying their greed and their plunderings as utilization of natural resources. Any fool can destroy a tree. It cannot run away. And if it could, it would still be destroyed, chased and hunted down, as long as a dollar could be made out of its bark hide. And few that fell trees plant them, Nor would planting do much toward bringing back anything like our noble aboriginal forest. During a man's life, only saplings can be grown in the place of trees tens of centuries old. It took more than 3,000 years to make some of these trees, still waving and singing in the mighty forests of the Sierra. And in all those wonderful, eventful centuries, since before the time of Christ, God has cared for these trees, saved them from drought, disease, storm, tempest, flood, avalanche. But he cannot save them from fools. Only we can do that.